My name is James Riley. I'm the Assistant Director of the North Shire Office of United Counseling Service. I've been working at United Counseling Service for 30 years, and I am duly credentialed both in substance abuse and mental health work. Currently working supervising a team of clinicians and doing individual supervision of six full time clinicians and carrying a full caseload of clients, both substance abuse and mental health myself.
What I'm looking at for today, James, is I'm wondering what's happening with not only just individuals during COVID, people with uh, pre predisposition to maybe substance abuse disorders. If you're seeing an uptick in that, but also on the family dynamics, because a lot of people have gone into a pod mode or just a family structure mode only, and it's been going on for a while now, and I imagine there's been quite a few stressors, not just individually but on family or relationship units. What are you seeing? Is that valid? What are you seeing?
Well, yeah, I would say that what we're seeing in terms of broader patterns is an increase in severity in terms of problems in family dynamics, domestic abuse, depression, suicide, overdoses, and substance abuse have gone up quite a bit. And I don't know the exact data on that nationally, but I know that we have seen that. And I mean, at this point in time, in my 31 years at United Counseling Service, we're in a period of that's unprecedented in terms of the amount of demand for services. So that would reflect an increased stress on family dynamics, which we see that play out in a lot of ways, whether it's adult children moving home and a whole family having to kind of readjust the entire dynamic, or the other side of it that I think is very stressful is people who do not have families,
Mm,
who are living in this period of the pandemic in isolation, often without many resources at their disposal, and in some cases, people that have never really developed the ability to communicate well. And then they find themselves either alone or in a very closed down situation compared to what their life was like before coronavirus, like many of us. So I think that's a big stressor. But, to talk about families, I think we're naturally seeing an increase in all the problems that can happen in families, whether it's relational, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, because of the fact that we are all, like you're saying, living kind of in pods. And now, of course, it's not just the coronavirus. If you look at what's happened for us as a country during this time, it's been a time of tremendous challenge. From our perspective, in terms of community mental health, we basically had to learn a whole new skill set in a very short period of time to adapt to the changing environment. Some of the work we were already doing, for instance, counseling by phone, that's always been done in some forms in the different programs. And I think the other thing to realize is I'm speaking from a perspective, a limited perspective, because our agency has many different programs, including for the chronic mentally ill, for the developmentally disabled, Head Start program for young children, substance use program, adult mental health, and children, youth, and family services, just to name, that's the big outline of
right.
what UCS does. My advantage is that I have worked throughout my career across almost all those programs. And at this point, we are seeing, as I said earlier, demand in terms of counseling for mental health and substance abuse services. And we are trying to keep up with that demand at the same time, having had to learn how to work remotely, how to manage the technology, there are many things that go into that that you wouldn't necessarily have anticipated beforehand. Some of us were more fortunate than others. You know, I had a background in training in video conferencing and public presentation, et cetera. So, but for many clinicians in the field now, some of them aren't even that comfortable with the technology, which means maybe they're doing more of their meetings by phone. Other people are comfortable with it, but connectivity is a big issue, both for the consumer and for the providers, being us, that you know, the challenges are unbelievable. I mean, there are some fun surprises in the mix. You know, when you open up your Zoom call and your client's like snowboarding or something, but it's I've seen some pretty interesting stuff in that time. But when you talk about families, yeah, there is, I think, a lot more pressure on families. United Counseling Service offers children, youth, and family-based services. We offer outreach into homes when it's appropriate to work with families, and we also offer traditional kind of family therapy with someone who has a background or training in family therapy. So there are different ways that families are getting helped, and we do have you know, a fair number of our people. One of the challenges with children, youth, and families is that a fair amount of those services have to be delivered somewhat face to face.
Right.
We've been back and forth with all the shutdowns and the schools and school-based clinicians as part of our children, youth, and family services. So it's, you know, a lot of different challenges that have gone on. But what I would say overall is we're just seeing record demand, which indicates, and it's no surprise to any of us, because the amount of stress that's been generated by the health crisis and the political crisis and the economic crisis. And I think that's the other thing that is really pushing when resources are limited, when we see the kinds of hardships that families are going through, record food lines at food banks, and all the added stress of not even being able to pay your bills at a time when we are limited in so many other ways, that is a huge stressor on top of everything else. So I think that's why we are seeing such an increase in demand for services. And we are, you know, we've been rising to that occasion as essential Vermont healthcare workers. But it has been, you know, mentioning that I've been at United Counseling Service for 31 years on Monday. This has probably been the hardest the last year, the most stressful, the most difficult, because of all the things that I've been describing. I'm very fortunate. You know, I have connectivity. I had a skill set of working remotely before it hit to some degree. And a lot of my supervision now is to help people be able to do that. And, you know, in our business, it's not just the work of the therapy face to face with people. It's all the behind the scenes meetings, documentation, and electronic and technical demands and training. You know, despite the fact that we are in this situation, there has been some extending of licensing periods where you do your license, but I mean, that's not particularly helpful because things don't appear to be getting any easier. So
right.
We're still having to keep our trainings up internally as well as our professional licenses. So when you factor that into the fact that some people did most of their trainings by going to periodic conferences, those are all gone. So we've got a lot of challenges in terms of what's happening, and families definitely have a lot of challenges. You know, there's different ways that people can approach working on family issues during this stressful time. One would be for an individual from a family to go into individual therapy, to look at their role in the family, to look at what positive change they might be able to exert on the family system, to look at what they could do better, and to look at how to communicate about issues and challenges that are coming up in the family. Now, the other mode would be an actual family therapy meeting where you have the entire family there. And, this kind of brings up one of the differences with remote learning, for instance, remote therapy, is that sometimes in therapy, I might be planning to have an individual session with the client, and all of a sudden there's a family member there.
Right.
Now that can be an opportunity as long as my client, the consumer I'm working with, is okay with it, but it's harder to gauge that remotely. In other words, are they just saying, yeah, I'm comfortable with mom being here in this meeting, no problem, because they know they'll get in trouble the minute they get off. And I can't read mom's body language as well as I could in an office, or the client's. So those types of things are some of the challenges that are presented. But with that said, we're also seeing some real positives. One of the positives is for some people, they're more likely to be able to go deeper and open up about their family stress issues because they're a step removed. It's not as confrontational, not the right word, but it's not as intense to disclose and share about these things, especially in a relationship that was never face-to-face. And that's the other thing that we're dealing with. Some of my clients now are people that I knew before the pandemic started. So there was a face-to-face relationship,
right,
which helps to bridge into the remote therapy services that I've been providing since. The other scenario is people that have come in since the pandemic started and have never met face-to-face with someone. We are still providing both on a limited basis, limited face-to-face contact, especially in things like people living in our group homes, people who need intensive case management services, who can't, for instance, get to their medication and that type of thing. So we're seeing a lot of different scenarios in terms of the way that we're trying to work with families. And I'm, for myself, I was trained in family therapy as well as the other disciplines I mentioned that I was licensed in. And we have a number of therapists who are. So, often family therapy can happen. But, often the other scenario that we see is if you've got, for instance, someone with a serious either mental health issue or substance use disorder issue in a family who's in denial, then the therapy might take the form of someone in the family going into therapy to try and figure out, what do I do? How do I help my family member? How do I help them to be able to accept the help that's out there, the help that we're offering them as a family? Because by their nature, things like depression and substance use disorders cause isolation and a pulling away of the person within the family who has it. So sometimes therapy could take the form of strategizing around that. And other times it might try to include the person. It really depends on every situation that we run into is different. And like I said, the other thing that we're doing and that we've continued to do as much as we can based on safety is to work with families both in the community, well, more youth and children in the community, but with families in their homes. So for instance, a youth and family-based counselor does have the ability to go into a home and do a family meeting, that type of thing. So we have a variety of ways that we can approach family issues and couples issues, which is a whole nother area of family therapy, which has been, I would say all forms of therapy have increased just because our volume has increased and the severity has increased, which is part of what's making it very challenging for all professionals at this point, because you're not just seeing an increase in demand, but an increase in severity. And we all want to help each other during this difficult time as much as we can. But the challenge in our work right now is also not to overextend, because if the therapist overextends, takes on more clients than they should, and is trying to do too much, then things get out of balance. I tend to take a more holistic approach in my work and in my supervision. And I don't recommend that people try to take on more and more and more work. I don't recommend that they try to overdo it. I don't recommend that they, not take vacation time or feel like they're obligated to. With that said, we've had some tremendous examples just in our organization of people who have gone above and beyond, which is fantastic. But as a rule, in terms of therapy, it's very important for a therapist to work within their limits and within the scope of what they've been trained in and what they are good at. So those are the challenges we're seeing, because the demand at this point has increased so much that it's challenging for everyone.
So what are some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that you have been seeing? You did mention, of course, there has been an uptick in probably alcohol or drug use as a coping mechanism. I assume that's probably not healthy. There's
Correct. Right. I mean, we have seen that. And that is a good example of an unhealthy coping mechanism. I mean, what I look for and try to help my clients find for themselves are healthy coping mechanisms. And often in, for instance, substance use counseling, what you're doing is trying to help the client look at what are some other positive substitutes that could take the place of this unhealthy coping mechanism that I've gotten myself into, whether it's, whatever type of substance it might be. And the other thing we're seeing, of course, is, substance use disorders is only one branch of behavioral addiction.
correct.
Of course, we're seeing a big increase in internet-based addictions such as gambling and gaming, sexual addictions, which often intertwine with the internet, and other addictions, whether it's food, retail, etc. So there are many different types of situations like that I think are getting intensified in families as everyone is taken out of their comfort zone. You've got, people who are very used to being very social, some people, and suddenly they can't be at all, or maybe
Right.
job and they can't even be. And that's another big stressor that I would say in terms of families that we're seeing is, unemployment, loss of job, loss of income, worrying about where just basic things like food are going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen, big increases in that. And, it is the approach to behavioral addictions is very similar to the approach with substance use disorders. The framework is very similar. What's happened is a habitual pattern that's negative and maladaptive has arisen. And the challenge is first to help the client be able to become aware of that, identify it, assess it, and then to make a plan of how to eliminate that. But that also usually includes building up other areas, like I was talking earlier, building up positive coping mechanisms. A lot of my background and training was in mindfulness and awareness training. So I am very much always promoting that with clients, whether it's meditation, relaxation exercises, beneficial exercise in general, whether it's yoga or outdoor based, that those things are very important. And, that's what we see kind of, unfortunately, when people suffer from anxiety and depression, these are the things that go by the wayside. And it's a process in therapy often of helping the person look at what worked for you in the past, and then how can you reconnect to that. Often the footprints are there in what someone needs to do and reconnect to. They're like, God, I used to go for a walk every day, and now I don't know the last time I went for a walk. So often it happens like that, and then you're helping them to uncover that and refine some balance, but at the same time building in important things like refusal skills and how to work around craving. Whether for all substance use disorders or behavior addictions, it's the same thing. How are you going to work yourself so that you're not face to face with that temptation all the time, so that you're doing something different? So that's part of that. And then the other thing is support systems. And this is where, a lot of people have suffered. Like I said, a lot of people that we have who are, for instance, we have a CR community and rehabilitation treatment program for people who have major qualifying mental illness diagnosis in the state of Vermont. And, before coronavirus, that person could go to a day treatment center. There were groups, individual therapy, activities, events, different things going on all the time. Much of that is gone for now.
So that would tie into respite for the other family members. When you had a family member who was in a chronic situation, if you would give your other family members a chance to have a respite for the 2-3 hours a day, and that's kind of gone now. If I'm hearing you correctly.
That's correct. I mean, the other thing that I want to mention in terms of families,
sure,
is that parents with school-age children or younger children, this is a huge area, both for our consumers and for our staff. We have a lot of highly energetic young people who are tremendous workers, but they are also challenged with riding herd on home learning for education, dealing with the fact that someone else in the family may have lost their job, or not having childcare anymore. I mean, these are the stressors that were not there previous to Corona that are putting tremendous pressure on families. And part of our job is to try and help as much as we can to do therapy with members of the families, or to do therapy with families who are adjusting. But we didn't have, right now is a good example. I'm working with families and children. I've always worked with children, teenagers, families, adults, all clients. And we're at the tail end of what I'm trying to even remember when they went on Christmas vacation, and it won't be going back till next Monday. So these are longer vacations where parents have to cover more and care of more. And then some kids are going back, some are learning remotely, depending on the school or depending on the parent decision. So you're seeing all of those factors, communications with schools, the stress of schools closing and reopening, and parents being like, whoa, I thought I had a schedule again. Oh, I don't have a schedule. My kids are back home. So this kind of constant readjustment is putting tremendous stress on our families, and especially ones with children, which is a real hardship. And like I said, we see that, and we're working as much as we can to support and help everyone who's in those situations. But it is tremendously stressful. And we know, unfortunately, when stress increases, some people don't have the good habits developed and they fall back into bad habits. So often it's a matter of working with that, as I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. So listening to what you're saying, I also assume then that you're seeing a lot of component of guilt with family members, and how if I've lost my job and now we're having food insecurity, housing insecurity, and I was the provider before, I know I would have an increased burden of guilt or that I'm feeling. Are you seeing that? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think we do see some of that. I think that often it doesn't come out directly. Someone may fall into a depression, or they may develop like anxiety that rises to the level of a mental health diagnosis. So that often it's not directly apparent to people. I think the people who are aware, it's like, the reason I'm feeling this way is because I can no longer provide for my family. That's at the more insightful end of the spectrum of consumers. Okay. And then I think a lot of people have maybe not been as aware of how that has affected them more unconsciously. And then other problems have developed as a result of that. So we probably see more of the latter than the former, although we do have, I mean, one of the important things is to kind of emphasize is that, therapy over the years has become less and less stigmatized, but it's still, there are still some people who hold that kind of old fashioned view. But therapy is not just for people who are having major problems. Many people are having what the psychiatric world, or psychology world would call an adjustment disorder. And, no one can tell us that we haven't had a few things to adjust to in the last 9 months. I mean,
That's very true.
a very challenging time. So you have a lot of people who can benefit from this who are not necessarily in trouble, but they need, and this is the other result, I think, of the pod effect. What's happened is the pod effect has caused people to lose contact with their social support systems that they had. So the buddy at work is no longer there. The friend that you would get together for with coffee that you just kind of, that just happened every week and you always did it. The luncheons with friends or whatever it might be for what particular person, so much of that has fallen away. So that people are, great, I'm home with my kids, I've got a job. I mean, I'm fictionalizing someone's situation, but I haven't talked to an adult in 3 days.
Right.
So there's a lot of those kinds of situations that are a result of the abrupt need for us all to be safe and to be much more contained. And what happens is that has a real price for a lot of people. And part of our job is to help them look at what are alternatives to that. For instance, a good example of that would be for substance use people. There is a very active online community in AA and NA and other self-help programs. And part of what needs to happen is some people aren't comfortable with that. People may need to help them, or the therapist needs to help them get comfortable with the technology, which has been part of our job too. I never thought as a therapist I would need to be as technically proficient as I now am. And the reason I've developed that skill set is because my clients need it. I've had clients who had no idea how to use a computer when this hit.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't have a cell phone. Or teaching someone who can't get the Zoom to work. And if they could be talking to their family all over the country and they're sitting in an apartment alone. So part of our job, as I see it, has been to help people to connect, to be patient, because as you know, it takes a lot of patience when someone doesn't know like where the buttons are on the Zoom screen and they've never had done a video conference call before. They're not sure what you mean by clicking on the link. I mean, there's all these different things that people that deal with technology every day take for granted that a lot of people who are either less familiar or totally unfamiliar with have to learn. And that, I would say, I've had a lot of really great experiences with that because it's very gratifying when you can finally break through. Like I had a client recently, and it had been since the beginning of coronavirus that client could not get on a video conference. So I hadn't seen the client in 9 or 10 months. And then finally it happened. So, and that for the consumer was a big breakthrough. They felt very supported and they were very happy that we as an agency had never gave up. It took a bunch of stuff and we were supported by other things like a federal program that gave us the free tablets to let consumers use kind of. So it's all
Nice.
kind of working together. So there are, real benefits. And I think the other thing that I look at too, and I try to look at with my clients is there are a lot of things to be upset about and a lot of things that have changed in a more negative way, but also there are a lot of things that are to be happy about and that have changed in a positive way also. Frankly, I don't think that it's a problem for people to slow down. And that's a personal bias that I have. I feel like the speed of our culture and the technology what was so intense before this hit, and that a lot of people have found themselves in a more contemplative space, more able to slow down, more able to reevaluate their life and their priorities. So, in some ways, it's more fertile ground for therapy to occur in.
Right.
And people would actually, and I've seen this a lot too, where people are actually arriving at their sessions really having given some thought to what they want to work on, to their issues and what's been going on for them, as opposed to maybe previous to this where they were too rushed. They had too many different places they had to be. They were checking their phone all the time. They were doing this, that. So, I look at that, and I also look at the fact that for some people, if everything they did that they found very positive and rewarding was out there and it's all unsafe now, then you need to kind of be creative. You need to figure out how are you going to do some of that in the way that you can now, whether it means, going biking on your own instead of in a group, or whether it means learning how to, get involved in an online exercise class. There's lots of different things that people can do during this time, leaning into something like that you wanted to do that you never had time to do. Now, many people do have time to do things that they didn't have time to do before. So we may not have as much in terms of social contact and running around or even financial resources. And yet, it's a great opportunity to slow down and reprioritize and be more contemplative and really try to figure out for each person what is the meaning of their life, what is important to them, and how can they develop that. So I think, I don't look at just the negative side of this. And certainly after a day like yesterday in this country, it's easy to get caught up in the negativity that's going on. But the other part of this, I think, is to look at the opportunity. Like I said, our agency has been able to rise to this challenge and work with it. And we've seen examples of people who have been selfless in their determination to help others. And that's wonderful. And without this, that would not have happened. So there are a lot of, as far as I'm concerned, positives as well, and a lot of very intense challenges. So I'm feeling like, we are probably not seeing the peak of this in terms of demand in community mental health and substance use treatment yet, because the peak of the stress that we're under as a country with our political situation and the pandemic has not peaked yet. So I think the other thing for my team and for the people that work so hard to look at is this is not a sprint. This has to be treated like an ongoing marathon, which could get a little harder before it gets easier. So I feel like we are realistic about that. We know that. And yet with the different things that are coming at us every day, like yesterday, it's incredibly challenging, but it's certainly not dull. I mean, we've certainly had our lots of different areas to work on and lots of different people that we've been able to help during this time. So overall, I feel very fortunate to have been able to kind of stay the course so far. And I feel incredibly inspired by the people who I supervise and who work in our organization who have, gone above and beyond and worked so hard because they know they're living it too. And they know how hard this is on everyone out there.
James, that brings up a question. Providers also need self-care, and you're shepherding a team of people who are adapting also, as you've mentioned, who've had to learn how. So how are you structuring your team to where everybody feels supported?
Well, that's another change that's happened that is quite difficult. You know, most of us on the team and the extended team in the North Shire is about 20 people, which includes school-based clinicians, clinic clinic-based mental health, substance use treatment providers, and administrative support staff. And one of the challenges is we can only see each other on Zoom.
Right.
That's a large group of people. And as you know, large groups of people can't meet. So we've had to be creative about ways to try to support each other at a time that's very stressful. You know, it's different individually. You know, in individual supervision, I try to help clinicians look at ways that they can stay in balance, ways to not overextend, and ways to keep themselves, you know, in a good place despite the pressure. But when you talk about the group, it's very different. And I'll give you an example. You know, I thought as we came into the holidays this year in the North Shire, we always had it's kind of a big deal to have this very fun Christmas party that, like all office Christmas parties, had its own unique little things built into it over really a 35-year history, you know, about 30 years of which I was part of. And I was thinking in November, I'm like, God, you know, we're not going to be able to have a holiday party.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, we can't bring food to each other because we would, you know, do a potluck. We can't, you know, do a Yankee swap or gift exchange, but maybe we can do something different. So let's all bring something, whether it's a recipe for the holidays, a poem that you want to read. We had someone sing a song. There were poetry readings. So people showed up and they brought something. And I think, you know, to me, there's great value in that. You know, one of the reasons I feel like we're in the state we're in as this country is because we've become over materialistic, attached to material things, whether it's food or gifts or money or whatever. And that in this case, people were able to show up and tell stories about years from the past. And, you know, I had my doubts because, as you know, doing an hour-long Zoom meeting of any type is challenging. Doing it as a holiday party when, you know, no one told me or, you know, no one asked me to do it. No, and I just said, I can't stomach not having the holiday party. So I'm going to do it. And so I did it. I sent it out and got it. And we've seen examples of that kind of behavior among our staff with all different kinds of things and ways in which we try to support each other at this difficult time. But make no mistake, it is very different not being able to meet as a team. You need to realize that, you know, in a setting like community mental health, part of the strength of it is that we come together as teams frequently, larger teams, smaller teams, the whole agency, by program, and there's strength in all those things. Now, all of those things have had to been moved online. So it is somewhat different and it's not as tangible sometimes. So that's a big change. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not a change. And I would say it goes in the category of a negative in terms of what we're dealing with in our work, because this is very difficult work to do. And to do it in a vacuum, it's very hard. And we're not in a complete vacuum, but you know, I can reach out and jump on video and do a consultation with someone, or if one of my clinicians has a crisis with a client, they can reach out to me very quickly. And that's where the connectivity and the non-interruption becomes very important. You know, you can't have interruptions when you have issues of lethality, suicidality, and other things going on. You know, tragically, we've seen an increase in suicides in this country and in overdoses. And it's a direct result of all the stress that we're all feeling. But the thing is, what's amazing to me is a lot of those things, like for instance, we're talking about substance use, that world is not shut down. You know, people are still overdosing and dying more so. And so we have to do that work in a different way, but it's very challenging. So those are some of the things that I try to look at, not just what clinicians are doing work-wise, but also how are they doing their self-care. And it's up to them what they share in supervision about what they're doing, but we all try to share with each other different things we do that help. And I will do things in our staff meetings, always have before and after the pandemic, like a team meditation, and different types of exercises that can help us maintain connection to each other, but also to maintain peace of mind. So there's a lot that goes into that. But overall, I mean, the thing that's really helping us is that we, had such a strong team in the North Shire of really people who have very good ability to take care of themselves and help other people to try and take care of themselves, that I feel fortunate to be working with them. It takes real dedication to maintain, especially during a time when the stress of this work has gone up so much and the stress on our consumers has gone up so much. So I'm just continually impressed by people's creativity and their ability to maintain balance at a time when they are constantly being buffeted with the winds of change.
Right. So I guess in your ideal world, hopefully next Christmas you can celebrate and share poems and songs in person over a potluck.
Right. There you go.
That would be awesome, because it sounds like that would actually sound like a very creative way to bring some intimacy into a Zoom situation.
Right. And the storytelling that went on from people who had been around and other people hearing the stories, as you know, storytelling, that's a kind of magic of its own.
Yes.
If they're, just kind of goofy, kind of, laughing about, what someone did 20 years ago or whatever, or how, we didn't even have, computers. We were all writing on paper, kind of anything. I mean, and hugely, my experience, and I think other people's experience of that, is that it's just a huge, huge relief and support. Humor is the other thing that I think is extremely important to maintain in terms of balance. And that, when people get extremely stressed, often their sense of humor and their ability to have fun and lighten up and take breaks gets diminished. And I think that's why, I agree with that definition. I don't know where I heard it, but the definition of a sense of humor is the ability to create space where there is none.
Huh.
So, you're trying to create some space which can allow people to rest, allow us to rest ourselves, and to remember not to take everything so seriously. And it's hard when there are so many very serious things going on in our world.
Right. James, I really want to thank you for your time today. Is there anything you'd like to add in closing?
I don't think so. I appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me the time to explain what we're doing at UCS very much. And I look forward to, as you said, hopefully a different horizon as the vaccine takes hold, and hopefully some stability in our approach to dealing with coronavirus and leadership for the country happens, that we will be able to, be back together again in the future. So, but thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.